The rain came down like bullets on the roof of McAllister's trading post that September afternoon in 1873. James Fletcher stood just inside the doorway, watching the storm turn the Wyoming Territory into a gray blur. He'd been a tracker and scout for the better part of 15 years, and he'd learned to read weather like most men read newspapers. This storm wasn't going anywhere soon. James was a lean man in his early 30s, weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of creek stone. His hat, a fine Stetson he'd bought in Denver 3 years back, sat on his head at an angle. It was the one luxury he allowed himself, and he'd turned down more than one offer to buy it off his head. The hat had kept sun off his face through desert crossings and rain out of his eyes during spring storms. It was as much a part of him as his own shadow. The trading post was nearly empty. McAllister himself stood behind the counter, sorting through a shipment of tobacco. 2 trappers sat in the corner playing cards and nursing cups of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The wood stove in the center crackled, fighting off the damp chill that tried to seep through every crack in the walls. That's when James saw her. The girl came stumbling through the door like a wounded deer, soaked to the bone and shivering so hard her teeth chattered loud enough to hear across the room. She couldn't have been more than 16, maybe 17 years old. Her deerskin dress clung to her small frame, and water dripped from her long black braid to pool on the wooden floor. What struck James immediately was the quality of her clothing. Despite being drenched, he could see the intricate beadwork, the careful stitching. This wasn't the dress of just anyone. She stood there dripping and shaking, her dark eyes wide and frightened. The 2 trappers looked up from their card game, interest flickering across their faces in a way James didn't care for. McAllister frowned, his hand moving subtly toward the rifle he kept under the counter. James didn't think. He just moved. In 3 long strides, he was standing in front of the girl. She looked up at him, and he saw something in her eyes, pride fighting with desperation. Without a word, he took off his hat and placed it on her head. It was too big, settling down past her eyebrows, but it gave her face some shelter. Then he shrugged out of his oilskin coat and draped it over her shoulders. "There's a stove over there," he said quietly, gesturing to the center of the room. "Get yourself warm." She looked at him for a long moment, and James had the strangest feeling he was being measured, weighed on scales he couldn't see. Then she gave a slight nod and moved toward the fire, his coat hanging off her shoulders like a tent, his hat bobbing with each step. McAllister caught James's eye and shook his head slowly, a warning in the gesture. James ignored him and went back to watching the rain. The girl stood by the stove for the better part of an hour, not saying a word to anyone. James noticed she kept touching the hat on her head, running her fingers along the brim like she was memorizing its shape. The trappers had gone back to their game, but they kept glancing her way. Finally, when some of the chill had left her bones, she straightened up and walked back to James. She took off the hat and held it out to him. Her hands, he noticed, were small but strong, with calluses that spoke of hard work. He shook his head. "Keep it till you're ready to head out," he said. "Storm's not letting up." She studied his face again with those sharp, dark eyes. When she spoke, her English was careful but clear, each word chosen with precision. "You show kindness to stranger. This is remembered." "No need to remember anything, miss, just common decency." "There is always need," she said, and something in the way she said it made the hair on the back of James's neck stand up. She sat down on a bench near the door, the hat still on her head, and waited. James went back to his own business, checking his supplies and making a mental list of what he'd need for his next job. He'd been hired to guide a surveying party up into the Bighorn Mountains come spring, and he wanted to be prepared. The storm blew itself out just before sunset. The girl stood, handed James his coat, but when he reached for the hat, she held it close for just a moment longer. Then she placed it in his hands with both of hers, a gesture that seemed almost ceremonial. 3 days, she said. You come to Standing Rock Creek at sunrise. Come alone. Before James could ask what she meant, she was gone, slipping out the door and disappearing into the twilight like smoke. McAllister came out from behind his counter, wiping his hands on his apron. You know who that was? No idea, James said, turning the hat over in his hands. It was still warm from her head. That beadwork on her dress? That's Lakota work. Fine Lakota work. And the pattern Well, I've been trading in these parts for 20 years, and I know what I saw. That girl's not just anybody's daughter." "What are you saying, McAllister?" The old trader looked toward the door where the girl had vanished. "I'm saying you might want to be real careful about going to Standing Rock Creek in 3 days. Or you might want to be real careful about not going. Either way, Fletcher, you've stepped into something." James slept poorly that night. He kept thinking about the girl's eyes, the way she'd touched his hat, the strange weight in her words. 3 days, come alone. It felt like a summons, and James Fletcher had never been good at ignoring those. He spent the next 2 days finishing up his business in the area, but his mind kept wandering back to Standing Rock Creek. He knew the place, a reliable water source about 10 miles northeast of the trading post, set in a small valley with good grass and shelter from the wind. It was neutral ground generally, a place where different groups might camp without starting trouble. On the morning of the 3rd day, James woke before dawn. He saddled his horse, a sturdy roan mare named Sadie, and checked his rifle. He wasn't planning on trouble, but in this territory, planning and reality didn't always see eye to eye. He made sure his revolver was loaded and his knife was sharp, then set out as the sky began to lighten from black to gray. The ride took just over 2 hours. The land was still wet from the recent rains, and the horses' hooves made sucking sounds in the mud. James kept his eyes moving, watching for any sign of movement, but he saw nothing except a few pronghorn in the distance and a hawk circling high overhead. He smelled the camp before he saw it. Smoke from cooking fires, the scent of horses, the indefinable smell of many people living close together. James stopped at the top of a low-rise and looked down into the valley. His heart nearly stopped. The valley was filled with lodges, not a dozen or two, but hundreds, their poles reaching toward the sky like a forest of bare trees. Smoke rose from fire pits. Horses grazed in temporary corrals, and everywhere James saw people, warriors, women, children, elders. This wasn't just a camp. This was a gathering, and standing at the edge of the camp, clearly waiting for him, was the girl. She'd changed into dry clothes, another deerskin dress with even more elaborate beadwork. Her hair was freshly braided and decorated with feathers. Standing beside her were 2 men who could only be warriors, their faces painted, their bearing proud and watchful. James took a deep breath and rode down the slope. Every instinct he had screamed at him to turn around and ride hard in the opposite direction, but he'd given his word in a way. The girl had asked him to come, and he'd shown up. Running now would be worse than not coming at all. As he got closer, more warriors appeared, forming a loose line. James counted quickly, then stopped counting. McAllister had been right. He'd stepped into something, and it was bigger than he'd imagined. The girl stepped forward, and the warriors parted for her. She walked up to James's horse and looked up at him, and he saw a small smile on her lips. "You came? This is good. This shows courage and honor." "Miss," James said, keeping his hands visible and away from his weapons, "I'm starting to think I should have asked more questions back at the trading post. My name is Wikapi Washte. In your language, good star. My father is Chief Takota. He leads our people." James felt his stomach drop. He'd heard of Takota. Every scout and tracker in Wyoming Territory had heard of Takota. He was a war chief, respected and feared, a man who'd fought against settlers and soldiers with equal ferocity when his people's lands were threatened. He was also known for his intelligence and, when it suited him, his willingness to negotiate. "Miss Wikapi," James said carefully, "I didn't know who you were. I just saw someone who needed help. I know. That is why you are here, and why you are still breathing." She said it matter-of-factly, without any threat in her voice, which somehow made it more unsettling. 3 days ago I was taken by 2 white men, trappers. They thought to ransom me or worse. I escaped when storm came. I ran. I found trading post. I found you. James felt a cold anger settle in his chest. Those 2 trappers in the corner, the way they'd looked at her. "They followed me," Wikapi continued. "They were waiting outside the trading post, waiting for darkness. But you gave me your hat. You gave me your coat. You treated me with respect when you could have ignored me or treated me as those men would have." She gestured, and 2 warriors came forward dragging something between them. Not something. Someone. The 2 trappers from the trading post bound and gagged, their eyes wild with fear. My warriors found them on the trail. They still had my torn sleeve as a trophy. They boasted of what they planned to do. James looked at the 2 men, then back at Wikapi. He was starting to understand why he'd been summoned. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you meet my father. He wishes to speak with the man who showed kindness to his daughter, when he did not have to, when it would have been easier to turn away." The lodge they led him to was the largest in the camp, decorated with painted symbols and battle honors. James dismounted and followed Wikapi inside, ducking through the entrance. The interior was spacious, with a fire burning in the center. Sitting around the fire were several men, all warriors by their bearing, all watching James with expressions that ranged from curious to hostile. At the far side of the fire sat a man who could only be Chief Takota. He was perhaps 50 years old, his face lined with age and experience, his eyes sharp and missing nothing. He wore his authority, like James wore his hat, as a natural part of himself. Wikapi spoke in her own language, a flowing stream of words that James couldn't follow. Takota listened, his eyes never leaving James's face. When she finished, the chief was quiet for a long moment. "Sit," he said finally, his English accented but strong. James sat, very aware that he was surrounded by warriors who could end his life in a heartbeat if they chose to. Takota studied him. "You are James Fletcher. You track and scout. You have lived in this territory for many years. You have fought against my people and with my people. You are known as a man who keeps his word." James was surprised the chief knew who he was, but he tried not to show it. "I try to be, sir. My daughter tells me you helped her without knowing who she was, without expecting reward. This is unusual. Most white men see only what they can take or what they can use." "I saw someone who needed help," James said simply. One of the other warriors spoke sharply in Lakota, his tone clearly aggressive. Takota held up a hand, silencing him, then turned back to James. "Tall Bear says you are a fool or a liar. He says no white man does kindness without reason." "Maybe I am a fool," James admitted, "but I'm not a liar." Takota's lips twitched, almost a smile. "My daughter's life is worth more than all the horses in this camp. It is worth more than gold or furs or land. She is my youngest daughter, my clever one, the one who sees what others miss. Those men who took her thought her worth only what they could get for her body or her ransom." The cold anger in Takota's voice made the temperature in the lodge seem to drop. "You gave her your hat," the chief continued. "Among our people, a warrior's headdress is his honor, his protection, his identity. You gave her your protection. You covered her with your honor. This is not a small thing." "It was just a hat," James said, though he was beginning to realize it had been much more than that. "No, it was a choice. You chose to be decent when you could have chosen to be cruel or indifferent. Now I must choose." James waited, his mouth dry. "Those two men who took my daughter, they will face justice, our justice. But you, James Fletcher, you have earned something from me. My daughter tells me you refused to take your hat back immediately. You told her to keep it until she was ready. This shows you did not help her to gain favor or reward. So now I offer you a choice." Takota gestured to one of the warriors who brought forward a bundle wrapped in buffalo hide. The chief unwrapped it, revealing an array of items: a rifle, new and well made, a beautiful knife with an elkhorn handle, several pouches that clinked with what sounded like gold coin, a medallion on a leather cord. "You may choose one item and leave in peace. You will have my friendship and the friendship of my people. Or," the chief paused, and James felt the weight of that pause, "or you may choose a different path. You may pledge to be a brother to my people. Not one of us, never that, but a bridge between your world and ours. You would speak truth to us about the white man's plans. You would speak truth to them about our ways. You would be trusted by both sides, but fully belong to neither. It is a hard path, James Fletcher, a lonely path, but it is a path that could bring peace, or at least understanding." James looked at the items laid out before him. The rifle alone was worth more than he'd make in 6 months of work. The gold would set him up for a year or more. He could take his reward right away and never look back. But he thought about Wikapi, standing in the rain. He thought about the way she'd touched his hat, the careful dignity in her movements, even when she was freezing and frightened. He thought about the two trappers and how easily he could have been like them, seeing only an opportunity to exploit. "If I choose this bridge path," James said slowly, "what happens to those two men?" "They will not trouble anyone again," Takota said flatly. James nodded. He wouldn't mourn them. "And what would you ask of me?" "Truth, only truth. When settlers come to my land, you will tell me truly if they come in peace or with conquest in their hearts. When my warriors grow angry and want to raid, I will send for you, and you will tell me truly if this will bring necessary justice or needless destruction. When treaties are offered, you will read them and tell me truly What words hide behind the white man's promises? There are people on both sides who will hate me for this, James said. White folk will call me a traitor. Your own people will doubt my loyalty. Yes, Dakota agreed. This is why I said it is a hard path. But my daughter believes you are a man of honor. She sees clearly, my Wikipi. She is rarely wrong. James looked at the rifle, the gold, the easy path out. Then he looked at the medallion, a simple piece of carved bone with symbols he didn't fully understand. The medallion, he said. That's the symbol of the bridge? It is. You would wear it always. Both your people and mine would know you by it. It would protect you in our camps. It would mark you as other among yours. James reached out and picked up the medallion. It was warm from being held, light in his palm. He could almost feel the weight of all the things it represented, pressing down on him. I've spent 15 years in this territory, he said quietly. I've seen what happens when people won't talk to each other, when they only see enemies instead of people. I've guided good folks who just wanted to farm and raise families, and I've seen them hurt because they didn't understand the land belonged to someone else first. I've seen warriors raid and destroy because they had no other way to make themselves heard. Maybe it's time for a different way. He slipped the medallion over his head. It settled against his chest like a brand. Dakota nodded slowly, and something like respect crossed his face. Then it is done. You are now brother between, and you will always have a place at my fire. But know this, James Fletcher, if you break faith with either side, if you speak false, I will hunt you myself. And if I do not, someone else will. I understand. Good. Now, we feast. You have given my daughter back to me. You have chosen a hard path for the sake of peace. These things must be honored. The feast that followed was unlike anything James had ever experienced. Food was brought out, more than seemed possible, from a mobile camp. Roasted buffalo, venison, wild turkey, roots and berries, cornmeal cakes, and stews that filled the lodge with rich aromas. Warriors who had looked at him with suspicion began to nod in his direction. Women brought him choice portions. Children peeked at him from behind their mothers, curious about the white man who wore the bone medallion. Wikapi sat across the fire from him, and every so often their eyes would meet. She would smile slightly, and he would nod. His hat sat on his head again, returned to him in a small ceremony where she'd placed it there herself, her hands lingering just a moment on the brim. As the evening wore on and the fire burned low, Dakota told stories. He spoke of the old days when the buffalo were so numerous they made the earth shake. He spoke of battles and hunts, of harsh winters survived and children born. He spoke of the changes coming, the tide of settlers that seemed endless, the promises made and broken by the government. I am not a fool, the chief said, looking at James across the fire. I know my people cannot stop what is coming. We are like a boulder in a river. We can stand firm for a time, but the water will eventually flow past us or wear us down. But perhaps, with truth between us, we can choose how we face this flood. Perhaps we can save something of who we are. I'll do my best, James promised. That is all any man can do. James rode out the next morning as the sun rose, painting the valley gold and red. Wikapi walked with him to where Sadie waited, saddled and ready. You surprised my father, she said. He expected you to take the gold. Did you? James asked. She shook her head. No, I saw your face in the trading post. You did not see me as a thing to be used or ignored. You saw a person who needed help. This told me who you are. I hope I can live up to what everyone seems to think of me, James said wryly. Wikapi reached into a pouch at her side and pulled out something small. She held it out to him. It was a beaded band, meant to go around a hat. The beadwork was intricate, showing a pattern of stars against a dark sky, with one star slightly larger than the others. For your hat, she said, so you remember the day you gave protection to a stranger, and how that small kindness changed paths for many people. James took the band, his throat tight. Thank you, Miss Wikapi. Just Wikapi. We are friends now, yes? Yes, he agreed. Friends. He fitted the band around his hat, and it settled there perfectly, like it had been made for that specific purpose, which he realized it probably had been. The path you chose will not be easy, Wikapi said. There will be times when both sides are angry with you, times when you stand alone, but you will be doing something important. You will be telling truth in a world full of lies and fear. When you put it that way, it sounds almost noble, James said with a slight smile. It is noble, but it is also necessary. Go now, James Fletcher, brother between. When we need you, we will send word, and when you need us, you have only to come. The first real test of his new role came 6 weeks later. A group of settlers, 30 families strong, came to the territory with plans to establish a town right along Standing Rock Creek. They stopped at McAllister's trading post to resupply, and word reached James within a day. He rode to their camp and studied the group carefully. They were farmers mostly, with a few craftsmen and shopkeepers mixed in, families with children, elderly grandparents, pregnant women. They were tired, travel-worn, and desperately hopeful. Their leader was a man named Thomas Garrett, a former school teacher from Ohio, with kind eyes and absolutely no understanding of the land he'd brought his people into. "Mr. Garrett," James said, after introducing himself, "you're planning to build at Standing Rock Creek?" "Yes. We've heard it's prime land, good water, shelter from wind. It's perfect for what we need." James felt his heart sink. "Sir, that's Lakota territory. It's one of their traditional camping grounds. If you build there, you'll be declaring war whether you mean to or not." Garrett's face fell. "But we were told this land was open. The land agent in Kansas City assured us the land agent in Kansas City was either ignorant or lying," James said bluntly. "Probably the latter. He got his commission when you bought your wagons and supplies, didn't he? He doesn't care what happens to you out here." The man looked stricken. "We've come so far. We've invested everything. Where are we supposed to go?" James spent 3 days with the settlers, talking to them, showing them maps, explaining the reality of the situation. Some were angry at him, calling him a traitor to his own people. Others were simply defeated, seeing their dreams crumble. But Garrett listened, and, slowly, James helped him understand. Then James rode to Tekota's camp, which had moved to follow the buffalo herds, but was still within a day's ride. He was welcomed into the chief's lodge, the medallion around his neck ensuring safe passage. "There are settlers," James told Tekota without preamble. 30 families. They want Standing Rock Creek." Tekota's face darkened. Several warriors reached for their weapons, but the chief held up his hand. "Tell me truly, Brother Between, do they come to conquer or to settle?" "To settle. Their families, Chief, farmers and craftsmen. They've been lied to by land agents who don't care if they live or die. They were told the land was open. They've invested everything they have. The land is not open. It is ours. I know, I've told them this, but they have nowhere else to go right now. Their supplies are running low. Winter's coming. If they try to push on to Oregon or California, some of them won't make it." Tekota was silent for a long moment. "You would have me show mercy to those who would take our land? I would have you see them as people, not as enemies. Not yet, anyway. Let me propose something." James laid out his idea. It took hours of discussion, translation, argument. Some of the warriors were firmly against it, but Wikipi, who sat in on the council, spoke in favor of listening, and Tekota, after much consideration, agreed to a meeting. The meeting took place on neutral ground, halfway between the settler camp and the Lakota village. James stood in the middle, literally the bridge between the two groups. Garrett brought 5 of his most level-headed people. Tekota brought an equal number of warriors, including Wikapi, who insisted on coming. It was tense. Guns were visible on both sides, but James kept talking, translating, explaining. He helped each side understand the other's position. The settlers learned that the land they wanted was sacred ground, used for ceremonies and gatherings. The Lakota learned that these particular settlers had been deceived, not intentionally invading. Finally, after hours of negotiation, a compromise emerged. There was another location about 15 miles west, with equally good water, but no cultural significance to the Lakota. It would require an extra week of travel for the settlers, and the land wasn't quite as perfect as Standing Rock Creek, but it was livable. Tekota agreed to grant safe passage and even to trade with the new settlement, provided they respected marked boundaries and agreed never to expand beyond certain limit. In exchange, Garrett agreed to send word back east about the true nature of the land agreements, warning other settlers about the corrupt land agents. He also agreed that the town would welcome Lakota traders and would serve as a neutral meeting ground. It wasn't perfect. Both sides gave up something they wanted, but it was peace, or at least the beginning of peace. As the groups dispersed, Wikapi approached James. "You did well today, Brother Between. You gave both sides a path that preserved their honor. I just hope it holds," James said tiredly. "There are 100 ways this could still fall apart." "Yes, but today it did not. Today you prevented bloodshed. This is enough for today." The settlement was named Bridgeton, in honor of the man who'd made it possible, though James was embarrassed by the gesture. True to Garrett's word, they built where they had agreed, and they sent letters back, east warning others about the land scheme that had nearly cost them everything. Over the next 3 years, James found himself riding between worlds more times than he could count. He negotiated water rights when a drought struck. He mediated disputes over hunting grounds. He translated treaty language for Dakota, pointing out the clauses that seemed innocuous but would rob the Lakota of their rights. He warned Garrett when hostile groups were moving through the area. He carried messages, explained customs, built understanding piece by careful piece. It wasn't always successful. There were times when he couldn't prevent violence. A group of whiskey traders nearly destroyed everything when they cheated some young warriors. A cavalry officer who saw all natives as enemies led a raid that left 3 people deceased. A band of Lakota warriors, angry at broken promises, attacked a supply wagon. Each failure ate at James. Each time he couldn't bridge the gap, couldn't find the words or the compromise, he felt the weight of the medallion around his neck grow heavier. But he kept trying. Wikapi became a friend and ally. She was often part of the negotiations, her sharp mind cutting through to the heart of issues. She and James developed a shorthand, a way of communicating with looks and subtle gestures, when words would be too provocative. She taught him her language, and he taught her the nuances of English legal terms. They became, in their way, a team. "You look tired, Brother Between," she said one evening, as they sat by a fire, having just finished a particularly difficult negotiation over mining right. "I am tired," James admitted. "Some days I feel like I'm trying to hold back a flood with my bare hands." "You are," Wikapi said simply. "But even if you only slow it down, even if you only save a few lives or preserve a few seasons of peace, is that not worth doing?" "I suppose. I just wish I could do more." "You gave me your hat when I was a stranger in the rain," she said softly. "You did not know who I was. You did not know what it would lead to. You just saw someone who needed help, and you helped. Everything that has happened since, all the lives saved, all the understanding built, it came from that one small act of kindness. Never think it is not enough." James looked at her across the fire, this young woman who had walked into a trading post, soaked and shivering, and had changed the course of his life. His hat, with its beaded band, sat on his head. The medallion rested against his heart. He thought about all the people in Bridgeton, living and working and raising families. He thought about the Lakota children he'd seen playing, who might grow up in a world with at least a little more understanding than their parents had known. "Thank you," he said, "for seeing something in me that day that I didn't see in myself." "You gave me protection when you did not have to," Wikapi replied. "I gave you a path to walk. We are even, you and I." Faita. The winter of 1876 brought the greatest test yet. Gold was discovered in the Black Hills, sacred land protected by treaty. Miners flooded in, ignoring all agreements. The government, seeing profit, looked the other way. Dakota's people, like many Lakota bands, were faced with a choice: fight for what was theirs or watch it be stolen. James found himself in Dakota's lodge on a cold February night, surrounded by angry warriors calling for war. The chief himself looked older, worn down by years of broken promises. "They take our sacred lands," Dakota said heavily. "They take the graves of our ancestors. They promised these lands would be ours forever." Forever lasted 3 years. "I know," James said, "and I have no words that will make that right. The treaty has been broken, and there's no denying it." "Us. Then why are you here, Brother Between? Have you come to counsel peace when war is just? Have you come to protect the thieves?" "No, sir. I came to tell you that if you choose to fight, I understand why. The treaty has been violated in every way that matters, but I also came to tell you what fighting will cost, because you deserve to know the truth before you make that choice." James pulled out a stack of newspapers and documents he'd gathered, laying them before the fire. "The United States is preparing for war. They want war, because it gives them an excuse to break the treaties completely. They have more soldiers than you can imagine, more weapons, more supplies. If you fight, you may win battles. You might even win many battles. But you will lose the war, and when you lose, they will take not just the Black Hills, but everything." The lodge was silent except for the crackle of the fire. "If you choose peace, what then?" Dakota asked. "We surrender our sacred lands. We watch them tear apart the bones of our grandfathers." "I don't have a good answer," James said honestly. "Maybe there isn't one, but if you negotiate now, while you still have some power, you might save something. You might secure land for your people to live on. hunting rights, protections. It won't be what you deserve, but it will be survival. Survival without honor is not life, one of the warriors spat. No, James agreed, but ending without survival means your children have nothing at all. No life, no honor, no future. I'm not saying what you should do, Chief. I'm just telling you the truth of what's coming. Dakota looked at his daughter. Wicopee met his gaze steadily. Brother, Between speaks truly, Father. I have seen the settlements growing. I have counted the wagon trains. They come like buffalo once came, more than can be numbered. If we fight now, we fight knowing we cannot win, only hoping to make them remember us. Sometimes, Dakota said slowly, that is all that is left to us, to be remembered. In the end, Dakota chose a middle path. He did not surrender, but neither did he go to war. He allied with other chiefs who felt the same, maintaining their position while sending James to negotiate on their behalf. It was a delicate dance, and it bought them time, though not as much as anyone hoped. James spent months traveling between military posts, government offices, and Lakota camps. He translated, explained, argued, pleaded. He showed officials the human cost of their policies. He showed warriors the military strength they would face. He tried to build understanding in an environment designed for conflict. He failed more than he succeeded. The forces pushing toward war were too strong, the greed too great, the misunderstanding too deep. But he kept trying, because that's what he'd promised to do. One spring day in 1877, James sat with Wicopee on a hillside overlooking both Bridgeton and the Lakota camp in the distance. Almost 4 years had passed since the day he'd given her his hat. I'm getting old, he said, though he was not yet 40. I feel old anyway. You carry much, Wicopee said, the weight of 2 worlds. It's not enough. No matter what I do, it's never enough. Do you regret choosing this path? James thought about that. He thought about the families in Bridgeton living in peace. He thought about the countless small negotiations that had prevented violence. He thought about the children on both sides who had known a few more years of safety because of his work. No, he said finally, I don't regret it. I just wish I could have done more. Wicopee reached over and adjusted the beaded band on his hat, straightening it slightly. Her fingers lingered on the pattern of stars. You remember when I told you that one small kindness could change many paths? You proved that true. You will never know all the lives you touched, all the deaths you prevented, all the understanding you built. But I know. My father knows. Many know. What happens now? James asked. The treaty's broken. More soldiers are coming. There's going to be war, no matter what I do. Now, you keep being brother between. You keep telling truth. You keep building small bridges even when the great ones burn. And when the war comes, you help whoever you can on both sides, because that is who you are. She was right, of course. The war came. James couldn't stop it. But he saved who he could, negotiating surrenders that spared lives, warning of ambushes before they happened, protecting prisoners of war from mistreatment. He carried messages between commanders and chiefs even when both sides suspected him of betrayal. Through it all, he wore the medallion and the beaded hatband. He kept his promise to tell only truth, and slowly, painfully, he helped build something that might someday become real peace. Years later, when he was truly old and Wicopee had become a respected elder herself, they sat together one last time on that same hillside. Bridgeton had grown into a real town. The Lakota were on reservations now. Their old ways of life changed forever. But there was still trade between the town and the reservation. There were still friendships. There was still understanding, hard-won and fragile, but real. Do you still have the hat? Wicopee asked. James smiled and touched the brim. Never could bring myself to replace it, though I've had to repair it more times than I can count. Good. Some things should not be replaced. They carry too much story. I gave you a hat because you were cold and wet, James said, and you gave me a purpose. Seems like I got the better end of that trade? No, Wicopee said, her eyes bright with memory and wisdom. We both got exactly what we needed. You gave protection to a stranger, and in return, you became a bridge for 2 peoples who desperately needed one. That is not trade. That is gift. And gifts given freely are the ones that change the world. James Fletcher died the following winter, peacefully in his sleep. They buried him in Bridgeton, but representatives from the reservation came to the funeral. Wicopee herself stood at the graveside, and when they lowered him into the ground, she placed his hat on the coffin. The beaded band she kept to pass down to her grandchildren, along with the story of the man who gave protection to a stranger and became a bridge between worlds. Because in the end, that's what it had all been about. not grand gestures or great battles, but one simple act of kindness on a rainy day at a trading post, one choice to see another person's humanity when it would have been easier to look away. And from that one choice flowed years of understanding, lives saved, and a legacy that would outlast any of them. The hat itself became something of a legend. It was kept in Bridgeton's small museum, displayed with a placard that read, "The hat that brought 300 warriors to peace." Visitors would look at it, this worn and repaired Stetson, with its beaded band, and wonder at how something so ordinary could be part of something so extraordinary. But those who knew the real story understood. It wasn't the hat that had been extraordinary. It was the choice to give it away. It was the decision to show kindness to a stranger without knowing who she was or what it might lead to. It was the willingness to step into the space between two worlds and build a bridge with nothing but truth and goodwill. And maybe in the end, that's the lesson that mattered most. That peace isn't built by great leaders or powerful armies. It's built by ordinary people making small choices to be decent, to be kind, to see each other's humanity, even when everything around them says to see only enemies. James Fletcher gave his hat to a soaked girl at a trading post, not knowing she'd come with 300 warriors. But what he really gave her was respect, dignity, and kindness, and what she gave him in return was a chance to be part of something larger than himself, something that would echo through generations. That rainy September afternoon in 1873 had changed everything, though no one could have known it at the time. But that's how change often happens, not with thunder and lightning, but with a simple gesture on a stormy day, one small choice to do the right thing when no one is watching and nothing is expected in return. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that one small choice becomes the first step on a path that leads to something extraordinary, not fame or fortune, but something better, a life lived with purpose, a difference made, and a legacy of understanding that outlasts any individual life. James Fletcher's hat still sits in that museum, a silent testament to the power of kindness, the importance of bridge builders, and the extraordinary things that can flow from one ordinary moment of human decency. And every year, on the anniversary of that rainy day, representatives from both Bridgeton and the reservation gather together, sharing a meal and telling stories, keeping alive the memory of the man who chose to give protection to a stranger, and in doing so, changed the course of history for everyone who came after.